The day my grandmother's estate attorney called me, I was eating cereal over the sink in my apartment, still in the oversized t-shirt I'd slept in. It was a Tuesday. Nothing about that morning suggested my entire understanding of the last 11 years was about to collapse. He said his name was Mr. Hargrove. He said he represented my grandmother, Eloise. He said she had passed 2 days prior. I set my spoon down in the bowl. I wasn't aware she was ill, I said. There was a pause on his end, the kind that meant he was choosing his words carefully. Miss Calloway, he said, your grandmother believed you knew. She believed you'd chosen not to come. Here's what you need to understand about my family before any of this makes sense. My mother Senwine Red was semi-aville for $147. Not emails, not digital greetings, actual cards with actual stamps, addressed in her actual handwriting to every person she has ever met who she wants to impress. Teachers, neighbors, her book club, my father's colleagues, people from her church who she hasn't spoken to in 3 years. Every November, she starts a list. Every December, she photographs the 4 of us, her, my father, my older sister Renee, and me, in matching outfits in front of our fireplace. That was the tradition. For years, I believed it was something we all participated in equally. I was 11 the first time I noticed something was off. I was at my piano teacher's house for my lesson, and she had a card on her mantel. I recognized the return address. I walked over to look at it, because I always liked seeing our photo. And there we were, my mother in her cream sweater, my father in burgundy, Renee in a little plaid dress. Know me. I was in that photo. I remembered standing there, being told to smile, being told not to slouch. But in the version my mother mailed to my piano teacher, I had simply been cropped out. The image cut off right before I appeared, leaving Renee's shoulder with a strange blank margin on the left side. I didn't say anything to my piano teacher. I went home and asked my mother about it. She said the photo printed funny, and the other version looked better. She said it with such complete, bored confidence that I accepted it and moved on. Because what else does an 11-year-old do? But I watched after that. I paid attention. The next year, I wasn't in the card at all. The photo was just the 3 of them, styled and beautiful, standing in front of a decorated tree. I found one she'd sent to a family friend before she could mail it. I turned it over in my hands. My name wasn't even in the greeting. Warm wishes from Robert, Sandra, and Renee. 3 people, not 4. I was 12 years old, and I had been edited out of my own family's Christmas card. I want to be honest about what I did with that information. I buried it. Because what's the alternative? At 12, at 14, at 16? You don't have language for it yet. You don't have the distance. You just feel, somewhere low in your body, that something is wrong with you, that you are the problem, that there is some version of yourself that is acceptable and the one you're currently living in is not it. My grandmother, Eloise, lived about 90 minutes away from us. She was my father's mother. Sharp, funny, the kind of woman who kept Werther's in a dish on her coffee table and could also dismantle any argument you made with 3 words. She and I had something specific together. She called me her reader because she was the one who'd first put real books in my hands, the ones with weight to them. She used to say, I asked questions that made her think. We talked on the phone every Sunday for years. And then, around the time I turned 17, the calls started getting shorter. I'd call and she'd say she couldn't talk long. Or I'd call and no one would pick up. I started to feel like I was bothering her. Like I was, once again, too much. When I went to college, 2 states away, I wrote to her. Old-fashioned letters, because she loved them. She'd always written back before. She stopped writing back. I told myself she was getting older, that her hands bothered her, that she was busy. I told myself whatever I needed to not feel the specific grief of losing someone who was still alive. By the time I was 23, we'd had almost no contact for 6 years. I'd stopped trying. I assumed she had too. That was the version of events I carried for almost a decade. It took me until I was 28 to start naming what my family had actually done to me. By then, I had a therapist, a small apartment in a city 4 hours from where I grew up, and enough distance to start seeing the shape of things. The way I'd been managed, not raised. The way Renee's activities had always come first. Her needs had always been louder. Her existence had always been more officially acknowledged. Renee was the one whose graduation party had been catered. Mine had been a cake from a grocery store and a handshake from my father. I'd been the child my parents found inconvenient. Not abused, not neglected in any legal sense, just minimized, consistently, carefully, over a very long time. And when I started to untangle that, I started to think about my grandmother differently. About how the calls had stopped. About all those unanswered letters. I mentioned it to my father once, over the phone. Casually. Said I'd been thinking about reaching out to Grandma Eloise more. He said she wasn't doing great, said she'd become difficult, said she'd moved to a care facility about 3 years prior and that she didn't always remember things clearly. You know how it is, he said. Hard to have real conversations. I believed him. That was my second mistake. 7 months before Mr. Hargrove called me, my aunt, my father's younger sister, Margot, drove 4 hours to appear at my apartment door unannounced on a Saturday morning. I opened the door, and she was standing there with 2 coffees from the place downstairs, and an expression I still don't have a name for. I need to tell you something, she said. And I need to tell you in person because I've been trying to tell you for 6 months, and I keep convincing myself it isn't my place, and I can't do that anymore. I let her in. What she told me over the next 2 hours reordered everything. She told me my grandmother had not stopped writing to me. She'd written consistently, letters, birthday cards, a package one Christmas, for years after I'd gone to college. She'd sent them to my parents' house, because that was the forwarding address she had for me when I first left. My mother had intercepted them, every one. Not only intercepted, saved them. In a shoebox in the top of the hallway closet, a detail Margot knew because she'd seen it herself once, years ago, and been told by my mother that it was handled and to stay out of it. And the phone calls. When I'd called my grandmother's landline and she hadn't answered, that was because my parents had, at some point, told my grandmother that I was going through a phase and that I'd asked for space and didn't want contact for a while. They had told an elderly woman that her granddaughter wanted nothing to do with her. My grandmother had spent years believing I'd abandoned her. I sat with that for a long time. Margot sat with me. Neither of us said anything. Then I said, "She's in a facility." "Birchwood Memory Care," Margot said. "Off Route 9. She has good days and bad days, but she asks for you on the good ones." I said, "Why are you telling me now?" She looked at her coffee cup. "Because she's running out of good days," she said. "And because I should have told you 4 years ago and I was a coward." I drove to Birchwood Memory Care 11 days later. I want to be clear about why it took 11 days and not 2, because I know how that sounds. I was afraid. Not of seeing her. I wanted desperately to see her. I was afraid of what she would remember, of whether she'd know me, of whether I'd get there and she'd be confused, and I'd spend the whole visit trying to hold myself together while some nurse watched from the doorway. I was also, if I'm being fully honest, dealing with the anger. Because it had taken root in those 11 days, in a way it hadn't in the initial shock. I'd started to understand the fullness of what had been done, not just to me, but to her. My grandmother had spent years thinking I didn't want her. She'd written letters that sat in a shoebox. She'd asked about me to Margot, who'd said she didn't know much. She'd been lied to by her own son. She deserved better. I deserved better. And sitting with that kind of grief is not something you can rush. I called Margot the night before I drove up, asked if she could find out whether my grandmother was listed as accepting visitors, or if my parents had done anything to restrict that. She checked. My name wasn't on any exclusion list. No one had thought to do that much. I drove up on a Thursday morning with a folder on the passenger seat. Inside the folder was every letter I could find that I'd sent her over the years, copies I'd made, photos of the handwritten notes I still had drafts of in old journals. And inside a smaller envelope was a letter I'd written the night before that took me 3 hours. She was in a common room when I got there, sitting near a window working on a word puzzle in a magazine. Her hair was white now, fully, and she was smaller than I remembered. But she held the magazine with the same posture she'd always had, back straight, reading glasses pushed up on her nose. I stood in the doorway for a moment. The nurse at the desk looked up and said, "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Eloise Calloway," I said. "I'm her granddaughter." She looked at a clipboard. "We don't have you in the visitor log." "I wasn't here before," I said. I didn't know she was here." That came out more broken than I meant it to. The nurse looked at me for a moment, then looked across the room at my grandmother, then back at me. She must have seen something in my face. She said, "Give me a moment." She walked over to my grandmother and leaned down and said something. I saw my grandmother look up from her magazine. Then she looked across the room at me. There was a pause that felt very long. Then she said my name. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just my name, in the voice I remembered, like she was confirming something she'd been waiting to confirm for a long time. I crossed the room and I sat down next to her, and she took my hand the way grandmothers do, and I told her I was sorry. She said she was sorry too. I told her that wasn't necessary. She said she thought I was angry at her for something she'd done, that she'd tried to figure out what for years. I told her she hadn't done anything. I told her some of what Margot had told me. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I saved every letter you ever sent me. I kept them in the blue box by my bed." "I kept trying to reach you," I said. "I know," she said. "I know that now." We sat by that window for almost 3 hours. It was a good day. One of her better ones, the nurse told me on my way out. I came back the following Thursday, and the Thursday after that. My mother called me for the first time in 8 months, 3 weeks after my first visit to Birchwood. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail that was mostly ambient noise, and then, "I heard you've been visiting. I think we should talk before you get any ideas." I did not call her back. My father sent a text that said, "Your grandmother has been confused lately. Be careful about what she thinks she remembers, we don't want her upset." I didn't respond to that either. Renee called and said she'd heard I was stirring things up, and that I needed to remember how fragile Grandma Eloise was. I thought about how none of them had mentioned the shoebox. I thought about what it cost to keep a secret like that for 11 years. I thought about Renee at every Christmas photo shoot in her matching outfit, smiling for the camera, knowing I was somewhere else. I thought about a lot of things, and then I stopped answering calls from that area code entirely. My grandmother passed on a Sunday, which felt right somehow. Sunday had always been our day. Margot called me. I drove up that afternoon and sat with Margot in the facility's small family room, and we drank bad coffee from a machine, and didn't say much. The paperwork was already in motion. There was an attorney involved. Mr. Hargrove's call had come 2 days after that. He asked to meet in person. I drove to his office on a Wednesday, parked in a small lot behind a brick building, and sat across from a man in his 60s, who had clearly been doing this long enough to be kind, without being surprised by anything. He slid a document across the desk. My grandmother had updated her will 14 months earlier, he told me, after Margot had told her the truth about what had happened, after she'd understood why I hadn't come. She left the house to me. Not split between the family, not distributed. The house, the one my father had grown up in, the one with the blue kitchen and the back porch and the garden she'd kept for 40 years, went to me. Along with a letter. I'm not going to share what the letter said. It's mine. But I will say that she had understood in the end what had happened. She had understood who had kept us apart and why. And she had made sure I knew that she had never, not for a single year, stopped thinking of me as hers. Mr. Hargrove also told me that when my father called his office, which he did twice in the weeks after her passing, there was nothing to discuss. The will was clear, recently updated, and had been witnessed by 2 people and her attending physician. There was no ambiguity. "Your father was not pleased," Mr. Hargrove said in the tone of someone describing a weather event. "No," I said, "he wouldn't be." Renee called me 11 times in one weekend. I let it go to voicemail each time. On the 12th call, I picked up. She said she couldn't believe I'd done this, that I'd gone behind everyone's backs, that I'd manipulated a sick woman, that I'd been scheming since I'd shown up at Birchwood out of nowhere, that this was why I'd never really fit into the family, because I was selfish. I let her finish. Then I said, she wanted me to have it. Renee said, "You don't deserve it." I said, she thought differently. And then I said, "I'm going to hang up now." And I did. I've driven out to the house a few times since then. Just to be there, to walk through the rooms and understand that it's real. The blue kitchen is exactly as I remembered it. The back porch needs some work. The garden is overgrown, but the bones of it are still there, the shape of what she built, all those years. I found the blue box she mentioned, still in the bedroom. Every letter I'd ever sent her kept in order, the envelopes stacked neatly. She'd read them. She'd kept them close. I sat on the edge of her bed with that box in my lap, and I thought about 11 years, about how long it takes for a lie to do its damage, about how much of that time we'd both spent grieving each other while we were both still alive. I think about her telling me, that first afternoon by the window, I know that now. That mattered, that she knew at the end that I had never stopped. I'm not going to pretend the rest of it doesn't hurt. It does. My parents haven't spoken to me directly since the estate was settled, which is its own strange grief. Not the sharp kind, but the dull, low kind that sits in the background of ordinary days. But I have the house, and I have her letters, and I have 3 months of Thursday afternoons that I didn't have before Margot showed up at my door. Some losses you can't get back, some time you cannot recover. But I got enough. I got to sit by that window and hold her hand and tell her the truth, and hear her say my name like she'd been waiting to say it, for a very long time. That's what I have. I'm choosing to hold on to that. I keep coming back to the shoebox. Not the house, not the attorney's office, not even that afternoon by the window at Birchwood. The shoebox. Sitting in the top of a hallway closet for 11 years, full of letters my grandmother had written to me and I had never received. My mother knew exactly what she was doing when she kept them. She didn't destroy them, and I've thought about why. Maybe she needed the proof of her own power. Maybe she just never got around to it. Either way, the keeping of them is what undid everything in the end. The thing she hoarded to control the story became the evidence that told the truth. That's how it tends to work, I think. Not in a mystical way, not fate or karma in any grand spiritual sense, just the plain, ordinary logic of cause and effect playing out over time. You make choices. Those choices compound, and eventually, the weight of what you've accumulated, the lies, the letters, the years, becomes too heavy to hide. What my parents did took a specific kind of dishonesty to sustain. Not just one lie, but a whole architecture of them, maintained over more than a decade, requiring them to manage what my grandmother believed. What I believed, what Renee knew, what Margot suspected. That takes effort, and somewhere in me I used to almost be impressed by it, the way you can be briefly impressed by something terrible before you remember what it cost. What it cost was Eloise, and what it cost was me. And what it cost was every Sunday phone call, every letter, every Thursday afternoon we didn't get to have. I think about the person I was at 17, 18, 23, telling myself my grandmother had grown distant, that I must have done something, that I was probably too much to keep in touch with. I believed that about myself for a long time, that I was the inconvenient one, the one who didn't fit the frame. It took real honesty to look back at that version of myself without flinching. To see clearly what had been done, name it without softening it, and stop making excuses for people who had never made any for themselves. That kind of clarity doesn't come easy. It requires you to be willing to see things as they actually are, even when the truth is harder than the story you've been living inside. And then there's the staying power of it. The part that doesn't get talked about enough. Margot drove 4 hours to my door. I drove 90 minutes to Birchwood, 11 days later, terrified, not knowing what I'd find. I came back the following Thursday. And the one after that? None of that felt brave in the moment. It felt like the only thing I could do. But I think that's what showing up actually looks like. Not dramatic, not certain, just continuing to move toward the thing that matters even when you're not sure what you'll find when you get there. My grandmother updated her will 14 months before she died. She'd understood the truth by then. She made a decision based on what she knew, clearly and without apology. I try to live like that now. The garden at the house needs work. The back porch needs work. I'm learning as I go, which is mostly how I've done everything that's mattered. But the blue kitchen is exactly as I remembered it. And some mornings I stand in it with coffee and I think about how much of what shapes a life comes down to whether the people around you tell you the truth. She told me the truth when it counted, and I held her hand. And that's enough to build from.